Senator Seliger represents us in Austin. He does a great job. He has been a great friend of public education, in particular from my point of view. It's what I know about down there, and he has helped us several years, done several different things. He stood up for public education and equity in school funding this session, and kind of stuck his neck out politically, I think, and is still very well respected in the Senate. So that says a lot about how he operates and what people think of him. And most recently, he helped us with our redistricting. He got us into the Texas Legislative Council to where we were actually able to save literally $20,000 with your help. And so he's done a lot for Muleshoe, and I'm very proud to introduce Senator Kel Seliger to speak to us.
Thank you.
While I get my pumpkin.
Thanks an awful lot. I appreciate you all being here. I do every year when you come for a town hall meeting, and they're always really interactive and interesting. And we got a lot of things to talk about. But in a very real sense, if I have done a good job in some areas, and certainly public education, it's because of people like Gene Sheets, and specifically Gene Sheets, who provide me the sort of tools that I need to do what you all need done in Austin. And we're going to talk about redistricting, and what Gene says is true. On the redistricting deal, you all saved about $20,000, but I didn't tell you, all you needed was a little bit of time and for Gene to do a whole bunch more work. And so in truth, y'all really only going to pay Gene a couple dollars an hour this year, so since you're paying him so little, just be nice to him. And I'll explain how that works when we talk about redistricting. Or pay him a lot more and treat him like dirt. He doesn't care. Either way. But when we talked a year ago, when I was here, we were looking at a deficit based upon a base budget. And that is a budget in the present biennium. As it goes forward and you add things like inflation and stuff like that and population growth, that becomes your base budget for the next, that's the budget that hits the table, plus however people choose to change it. So when we met a year ago, that budget showed that if we addressed all those things, the budget would be $27 billion in the red. By Constitution, we can't do that in the state of Texas. When we get to the end of the legislative session, that budget's got to be balanced and everything's zeroed out except for bonded debt. Obviously, we can't print money. And so that's what we had to deal with. And that's a pretty daunting prospect because population continues to grow in the state of Texas. And enrollment in public schools continues to grow. And so how do you deal with it? It was the House's turn to do the budget for us. We take turns. And the House sent us a budget that was balanced. It took $9 billion out of public ed. It also ended public funding for 4 community college systems and some things in there that were really, really more painful than we in the Senate thought they ought to be, in a budget that we knew was going to be painful. We were having to make the sort of decisions that people in the state of Texas make every year when it comes to the things that they want, their families need, but the figures don't add up with the money available. At the end of the session, by the time things ended, we had put $5.7 billion back into public education. That's the single largest part of our budget, and most people think the single most important thing that the state of Texas does or provides or funds. And where the shortage comes that you hear from is as that budget moves forward, what that budget did not take into account was enrollment growth, inflation, and decrease in property tax appraisals. And that's $4 billion that normally school districts would expect going from one budget to the next. And that did not get addressed. You've heard an awful lot about what's called the Rainy Day Fund. It's called the Economic Stabilization Fund because the way it was envisioned by Billy Clayton was that when the state has a really tough economic time, that money would be there in a savings account like any other savings account, yours or mine. And you know, from my poor, simple point of view, if ever there was an economy that needed stabilizing, this was it. Worst recession since 1929. And so late in the session, there were a couple of amendments to finance bills to put more money from the Economic Stabilization Fund. Yeah, not all of it. And that was the right decision to directly into the formulas for public schools, not anywhere else, into the formulas for public schools. I voted for those amendments. And not a lot of Republicans did, and that's sort of beside the point. To me, it wasn't a Republican vote. It was where putting the medicine where the most hurt was, basically. And that was not approved. We've now seen that money comes from oil and gas. We've now seen a bunch of money go into the Economic Stabilization Fund. It's in good shape. We could have afforded that $1.1 billion, and I think that's a mistake. The intentions of the people who voted against me were just as good as mine. They just happen to be wrong. Which is one of the few times that I can say that, because around my house I'm always wrong. So it was nice to be right once. And so that's where we were. We tried to do some things in public schools to help public schools. This sounds like a silly thing to say, but what we're trying to do is let public schools run their own affairs. Public schools, our system is designed to be more autonomous than it really is, the way that it operates. A year ago, you saw headlines that said that schools were going to have to let go 12,000 personnel, primarily teachers. The one that commanded the most attention were teachers. The number ended up being 12,000. I think there were some reasons that people used an inflated figure, and I think it was for political purposes. The numbers never came up to 100,000. 12,000 is a lot, and we regret that. Over 1,000 school districts, maybe not so many. But what's happened in a lot of school districts, if they did have layoffs, they have hired teachers back. Houston Independent School District alone, over 300. That's a very positive thing. But what a lot of people don't realize, because the state of Texas legislature gets involved all the time in employment matters having to do with school personnel, people think that school personnel are state employees. They are not. Teachers specifically really aren't even school district employees, if you want to be really strict about it. They're independent contractors. But for the sake of this discussion, they are school district employees. The checks come from Muleshoe ISD. And there's a feeling a lot of us have that that a locally elected school board, elected just the way that we are, ought to make decisions about how to run that school district. And so that's sort of the same things we do. Gina and I haven't discussed this, which is terribly unfair on my part. But my children say that's usually the way I operate. I assume that you haven't furloughed anybody. We've done, I'm going to do 38 town hall meetings. We've done maybe 30 already, 30 close. No superintendent yet has furloughed anybody. For the first time, probably 40, 50 years, school districts can furlough in cases where it makes a difference, and it does economically, if they need to, if the school board does. Not in one town hall meeting have I talked to a superintendent yet where they furloughed anybody. They don't want to. The school board doesn't want to. Should they have that tool if they need to operate the school district given the money that they have available? Yeah, they should. We changed some things on notice of non-renewal of contracts that allow school districts to plan, and they've got kind of tricky planning when it gets to the end of the school year, things like that. We did something that really never mattered when you and I were in school, and then we get money from the available school fund for school books, textbooks. For the first time, we approved school districts, if they choose to buy something other than textbooks, to buy computers or software and things like that. For those of us with kids that are, gosh, now under the age of 40 probably, that's the way more and more children are getting information and learning. And we're going to see more and more and more of that. We're going to see a day where we no longer have educational materials in history and political science and like that are out of date, because they'll be updated daily or after every election cycle or whatever. And I think that's important. Now, what the school district chooses to do, entirely up to them. I think that's an important principle. Let the school districts decide. There was an article in the newspaper 2 or 3 days ago where school districts said they didn't have the information for the STAR test. I'm particularly interested in that because I did the initial bill to do away with the tax test. It was very much an educator's bill. It was a good idea. The way we passed it was a good bill. I'm very concerned about the direction it's going. Very concerned about it. The point of the test was to improve upon the tax test, the amount of time and resources that it took. And at this point, I don't think the STAR test is doing that. It's no. People in Austin seem kind of proud that it's going to be a harder test. That's okay, except the tax test. How many of you saw the 10th grade math tax? Any of you get a copy of it from Gene? It's a difficult test. It was difficult when we were in the 10th grade. For those of us who've been out of the 10th grade for a while, it's a real challenge. If the kids do well in that test, you can count on the fact that they've been learning in an independent school district. I'm opposed to doing things like changing targets, and I think once we had the tax test in place, that we should have provided the support and given schools the opportunity to really improve on that, because if you keep changing the targets, how do you know school districts are or are not improving? And you don't. And that's one of the areas that I'm disturbed about. I'm glad we're implementing the test. It's going to be far better than the tax test, because here's what's going to happen. When they give the test this year, I'm going to get a lot of input from superintendents, because I always do. And what we're going to do in the next legislative session, if we have to legislate, and we should not have to, is to make those changes that we need, that the test meets the needs of the state, even though I'm not quite sure what those are sometimes. It meets the need of the school district, preparing those kids, making sure the kids are promoted, deserve to be promoted, and that they've got the preparation they need for the future to go to college and what happens next. And so what's going to happen is that the 60 superintendents in the 31st district, which is going to be about 70, are going to let me know what we need to do, and we're going to do it. We have got to work on this high stakes testing deal. I think an increase from 21 days to 45 days for testing is absolutely ridiculous. And it's going to undermine the fundamental reason those kids are there is to learn, not to test. We've always had tests, we're always going to have tests, we're always going to have accountability. Nobody's fighting accountability, but we need a system that makes sense. We discussed this at lunch, and it looks like the administration is going to provide waivers for No Child Left Behind. And I've talked about this before. No Child Left Behind, everybody's heart was in the right place. They just went about it in a horrible way. And it's non-productive, and it hurts school districts. It doesn't help them. The Commissioner of Education said a couple weeks ago, and this is not like him, because I didn't think it was a statement that was very well thought out, and I would tell him that he had to decide whether to seek those waivers for No Child Left Behind. Well, yes, he's going to. He's going to reach the conclusion, if he hasn't already, that it's the right thing to do. But I guarantee you that if the administration offers waivers, and they have not been sought by the commissioner, there will be a bill introduced a year from now requiring the state of Texas to seek those waivers. Quite frankly, they ought to do away with No Child Left Behind, and it adds nothing in terms to an accountability system that really requires or tests or recognizes performance in independent school districts. And we'll come back to issues like that, and I do a lot of education legislation, not because I'm an expert, but when you have 60 superintendents and hundreds of teachers who are experts, it provides you something really to work with. And so all of my education legislation is vetted by superintendents, teachers, curriculum specialists, and things like that, every bit of it. And so during the session specifically, Gene and I email a lot. And it works really well. Whenever we have an idea or do a bill or stuff, we email it to all those superintendents, and then we redo it. You find when you have the diversity of school districts that we have, from 132 students to 32,000 students, for extraordinarily wealthy school districts who are really kind of poor, that there's a lot of diversity of opinion, and so some of the things, when Gene was saying, some of the stuff kind of got me in trouble, it did. Because if you're going to do something that really is going to help a poor school district, well, maybe rich school districts aren't going to like it. We have a target revenue system that I think is a horrible system because it doesn't work. But there are districts who like it. It provides them with an advantage. But do we want to, can we really have a system where some districts are advantaged and others either are not or are disadvantaged? Well, no, we can't do that. You read in the newspaper about the lawsuit that's been filed. That's not a personal or adversarial thing. We knew that was coming. It is filed, it's inequity, and it has to do mostly with the monetary or financial inequity between districts. And it absolutely exists. And a lot of us are working hard to change it. For us, the lawsuit didn't mean anything because we knew the system needed to be changed anyway. And we tried to do it this last session. We did a little bit of good, but we're going to have to do more. The question is not whether the system is equitable or not. It's whether that lack of equity is going to be the source of decision on a lawsuit. What I think could very well happen is that once everything they've got everything in place, what the courts are likely to say is come back after the legislative session and see what the legislature is going to do about it, because it takes years to litigate anyway. I'm fine with that, and we're going to have some ideas, but they're going to be tough ones because in the end, a whole lot of cash would solve all of our problems. Almost all of our problems. But the people of the state of Texas don't want to be taxed more either. So where does that money come from? How do we have a system that does what it needs to do in light of flows of cash that are modest? Therein lies the question. And the other issues, they are really what they've always been. Healthcare is 30% of the state budget. Most of our healthcare money goes into Medicaid match money. We're leveraging federal money. And most of Medicaid money goes into nursing homes. I think we'll all agree that they're absolutely necessary and they provide an invaluable service to the people of the state of Texas. I tell people all the time, this is a particularly critical issue in light of nursing homes and things like that, because if Medicaid suffers too much and those nursing homes close, I hope it's several years from now, but my mother-in-law could be coming to live with me. We need to treat it like it's a really important issue. But it is, and it has to do with a lot of things in healthcare. When we talk about healthcare delivery, I'm disturbed about the fact that so many practitioners are not taking Medicare and stuff like that, and they need to participate in the system. That's more of a federal question, but we need them in the system. Transportation, as always, is a big issue. We've seen a real reorganization of the transportation department to make it more responsive, I think, and better managed. There's going to be a new executive director who is a really good guy and a really smart guy. He's not coming from the transportation establishment, so he's got no turf to protect or no ego there. He is not a highway engineer. His graduate degree is in business, and it's going to be his job to run an organization that already has 1,400 engineers who do a good job, by the way. And I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, we're going to have to put more money into the state of Texas because we're going to have more people in this state. They're going to require more in the way of the transportation system. It is going to have to grow in areas like the I-35 corridor, but it darn sure has to be well maintained here. And we shouldn't have to compete for maintenance monies with the growth in the urban areas. The problem we've got is if you go along that I-35 corridor, and that's Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, the Rio Grande Valley, it's easily more than half of the legislature. They could probably have just about what they want. Fortunately, I think they respect our positions and things like that. If we're going to pay disproportionately in the state of Texas for every tax dollar going transportation to those urban areas, we cannot be ignored in this part of the state. And so when we look at monies going to transportation, we need to make sure that those decisions are based upon the need involved. and not political decisions based upon where the legislators live and represent, which sometimes is really what happens. One of the big issues has always been, for as long as I've been in office, immigration, but more accurately, illegal immigration. If you look at all the problems in illegal immigration, be they in the criminal justice system, in the healthcare system, social services and things like that, it really boils down to border security. The problem we've got is our border is porous. People can come across pretty much when they want to, and then they're in. They're in the system, and the federal government isn't doing much about that. Border security is national security. And it doesn't just apply to poor people who want a job. Certainly, it has to do with human trafficking and trafficking of drugs and stuff like that really affect this country. And it is the province and responsibility of the federal government to protect that border, to make the laws regarding immigration, to enforce those laws. And quite frankly, they're not doing a very good job. We're represented here. This is Randy Neugebauer's district, right?
Yes. Yes.
Here's the good news. Randy Neugebauer, Mac Thornberry just to the north, and Mike Conaway to the south, realize that and are working on it. And you have to recognize that they're doing all they can do. They're not getting the help they need from the rest of the people in the U.S. Congress. And how does that affect us? It means that state of Texas is going to go from about $110, $120 million to almost $250 million on border security. That's money and effort should be coming from the federal government. And it has to come from the federal government because we have made improvements in border sheriff's departments on the border, and it's a 1,200-mile border. It's huge. But if they don't have the same quality of effort in New Mexico, in Arizona, California, it decreases the value of our effort. Because particularly today, and let's talk about the potentially least harmful of those people, just people who want to work. If nobody crosses the Texas border illegally, it makes no difference at all, because if they come in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, where are they coming? Colorado, California. They're going to come here because it's where the jobs are. And so it is a national effort, and it has to be the whole border. When we talk about redistricting, it was my first chairmanship. And most of the first chairmanships are generally things like nominating or administration. The lieutenant governor appointed me to the select committee on redistricting. Apparently he thought I had a lot of time in the fall of 2011 to spend in court. And it really hasn't been that much time. But it is a system that's always been very partisan, and it's been very divisive, and it's a tough thing to do. They say that for most of 10 years, people pick their representatives in Congress and legislature, but every 10th year, when redistricting comes, legislators pick their constituents. It works that way sometimes. I'm proud of the fact, I've been told it's been a lot of years since the legislature passed all 4 of the maps, State Board of Education, State House of Representatives, State Senate, and U.S. Congress, sent it to the governor for his signature. What has never happened, and probably never will happen, is when people don't see what they want in that map, they sue. And we expected it, and it's gone very well so far. The Justice Department took no issue with the State Board of Education map or with the State Senate map. Doesn't mean there's still not a lawsuit filed, one in Washington and one in San Antonio, but it looks like that's going to pass pre-clearance. There's going to be some challenge to the Texas House of Representatives. We do nothing with their map. That's their work, and they work hard on it. It passed the Texas Senate. After it came out of the House, passed Texas Senate in 2 minutes. And then there's the U.S. Congress. Texas got 4 new seats. That's a big deal because Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, all lost a congressman. That's a big deal. Louisiana lost 1 seat in Congress just based upon Hurricane Katrina. And it's important. That number of congressmen is really important because those are the people essentially fighting for you in the Congress of the United States. It's a big deal. And so we did the map. There are some challenges to it. We expected them. The challenges come 2 different ways. because we are south of the Mason-Dixon line, and this is not strictly just for those states, every election we have, every map we draw, whether it's for a school district, the Congress of the United States, a municipal utility district, a water district, has to be submitted to Washington, D.C., either the Department of Justice or the federal court system for what they call pre-clearance. And all pre-clearance means is before you have elections, you have to ensure that your district does not violate constitutional rights, essentially, for historically underrepresented minorities. It's been in place since 1965. And so when we do a map, we have to send it to them first. And it's going on now, it ought to be resolved in about a month. So Gene's idea was, and here's what happens when you redistrict, whether it's me and you redistrict for the whole state, or you're Gene and you're redistricting just for Muleshoe ISD, you have all these lawyers, and the majority of them smart, capable people who want to really kind of take this over, and they're going to draw the maps for you, they're going to defend them in court, and then they're going to send you a big bill. Well, in the legislature, we can handle that bill because we know we're going to have legal challenges, but do you all have to do it? And so what Gene thought he'd do was, because he's done this before, is he would draw the maps himself. And I had a lawyer who had done this in 2001, and I had two lawyers at Baylor Law School and one lawyer in Austin, and one guy at the Republican National Committee, and a guy working for the Republicans in Congress, and Gene's going to do it by himself. And
you were a little surprised at that phone call first, weren't you?
well, I was, and I thought Gene's going to have more lawsuits than I do. But it turns out that obviously it's a little more homogenous here and things like that. Gene has done it before, and we now have a computer program that really does that very nicely. And so he went down to the Capitol and had our legislative counsel, who will help, and sat down at the computer and did it. And here's where it saved you the $20,000, which were probably lawyers and map drawers that were going to do what Gene could do. And what you've got is a map that has no apparent violations, deprives nobody of any constitutional rights, and it's going to be probably a very good map. And nobody's challenged it yet. If somebody challenges it, then you'll have to have the lawyers. But if nobody challenges it, nothing's happened yet. You know, that's money from the school district that'll go into the schools, and that's a great thing. It's a real sophisticated computer program, surprisingly user friendly, and it's that's a big deal to get through that like that. And I hope we were of some help, because it's a big deal. You're the only superintendent that called one to come do their own redistricting that I know of.
That's what they said too.
Yeah, they probably said, "You're what?"
Yeah.
There's school districts of this size. It will be interesting to see if more of them do it. It's a lot of work. You shouldn't, because you got to analyze those figures as you move lines around, and you got to know what you're looking at, because every time you move a line around, and I don't know how close they were when you did it here, but we can move them from city block to city block in Houston, and it will tell you not only when you move that block exactly how many people are in that census block, and what the ethnic makeup is, the percentage of that population that it's Hispanics, a voting age population, African Americans, a voting age population, things like that. And all that's important when it comes to the constitutional constraints on redistricting. So it's fairly sophisticated. There has not yet been a run of superintendents to the Capitol to do their own redistricting. Just hasn't. But those are sort of the high points of the things that we did. This is going to be an interesting year, because there are a lot of races in the Texas House of Representatives, and we may see 30 seats change in the House of Representatives. In the Texas Senate, there are 4 members that aren't coming back, which is probably going to be the biggest number since 1993, and they're particularly significant because they're really senior members, and that's the chairman of the Finance Committee, and the chairman of Public Education, the chairman of Jurisprudence, and and let's see, the chairman of something else that's pretty important. And so that's a big deal. There's going to be real changes there. And what it means politically has yet to be determined, but we'll see what happens there. It's a presidential election year, and so I think turnout is going to be fairly strong. And we'll just wait and see what happens. But I'll talk about whatever y'all want to talk about.
What about water rights issues?
Water rights. The bill passed that said there is a property right in water. And that is particularly important in one area in my view, and it used to be, if y'all have been cultivating some land and watering for the last 50 years, you're fine. Water district, groundwater conservation district approves your permits. But let's say these folks haven't, but they buy some land and they want to cultivate some wheat or feed cattle. Districts have had the right to say, since you were not historical users, you don't get any water. We took care of that. It is a question of private property rights, and those are important rights. The problem groundwater conservation districts are going to have in the future, by necessity, if their management plans and their permitting are going to meet the requirements of desired future conditions, which is how much water do you want left in your portion of the aquifer in 50 years or 100 years. Let's say now that they have a right to water, and the water district issues them a permit, and it's got to be some sort of equitable permit, just like yours. At some point, that groundwater conservation district is going to say, if we're going to meet the requirements of our desired future conditions, that your next permit is going to be for less water. You're not going to be very happy. You are going to be as happy as you can be made because you're getting your private property right, but it's going to impact things very deeply, more here than a lot of areas, because 95% of the water that comes out of the Ogallala is used in agriculture. Ours is an agricultural economy, and so it has a big impact, because for you three, that has a lot to do with crop choice, because what happens in a year where corn is $7 a bushel, and the Groundwater Conservation District says, well, here's your permit, and it may not allow you to grow corn, then you've got to make a choice. Feed grains, cotton, things like that. And that's where those decisions ultimately will come to roost. And it is not going to be without controversy. The point is, one of the things that I've felt kind of strongly is, we're better off with local control, with groundwater conservation districts, because sources of water, even if it's all underground water, are different around the state. They can be surface water, reservoirs, water, and stuff like that. Regulation is different in every area. Even when we just talk about groundwater, the Ogallala Aquifer is hydrologically entirely different than the Edwards Aquifer. We use the water for agriculture, they use it for commercial use, municipal, residential, and things like that. And so I've been a big believer in groundwater conservation districts, but watch and see if I'm not correct. How many of you know who the members of your groundwater conservation district are? I assume you're in one. How many of you know who the members are? Oh, you're in High Plains? Okay. I don't know. I think Jim Conkright, has he already announced he's retired?
He has.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if he's announced it. I've heard that
Me too.
Put it that way.
He's gonna be a tough guy to replace. And you'll find somebody good, and you'll find people who want it. People are gonna be paying attention to those elections, who's elected and what they think and how they think this ought to be done, because they're gonna have to make some very tough decisions in the future. We've got three options around here. The conservation of what we've got, which probably represents the greatest amount of water, if we are good stewards of the resource. Desalination, which is very important and has a lot of water potential in it. El Paso has a plant that will desalinate 27 million gallons a day. They're not operating at that capacity. But it's going to be an important source of their water in the future. And then recycling, taking wastewater, bringing it pretty much, if not completely up to drinking water standards, mixing it as a rule with either groundwater or surface water stuff, and putting it into the drinking water cycle. I don't know how many of you saw this. It's been 6, 7, 8 weeks. And the manager of the Colorado River Municipal Water District, headquartered in Big Spring, was on TV. Big Spring's in this district. and talking about their plant, which will do 2.5 million gallons a day. It'll take water essentially out of the sanitary sewer system, bring it almost up to drinking water standards, mix it with surface water and groundwater, which they also have, way surpass drinking water standards, really good water, put it into people's homes. And they had a guy, that the second part of the report was a guy with these water bottles, and he was in Big Spring filling up at the kiosk downtown saying, I know where that water comes from, I'm not using it. Well, he will. And he'll be lucky to have that water that's going to be good, healthful water. They just need to not talk about where the water comes from unless asked. Because at some point it was in the sanitary sewer. But they're working really proactively there, and I think doing a really nice job. But those are the real challenges. One of the biggest challenges we have in the future is going to be water. And really everywhere in the state of Texas. And then we can talk about desalination on the coast, which I think is a great source of water. And really that water may make it up as far as the Metroplex. I could talk about the statewide water plan, how I think it's essential for the future. And the water infrastructure fund. And in the future is going to supply water for Houston and for Muleshoe and for places that need it in a revolving fund that's going to keep regenerating, but it's going to be really, really low interest rate loans. If you were to need a new wastewater treatment plant in Muleshoe today, it'd be very expensive. And people are going to need every bit of help they can get. The Metroplex is going to need reservoirs. If they started today, it'd be 30 years before they got a drop of water out of it. But they've got plans way off into the future, desalinating water in the Gulf, going to the Toledo Bend Reservoir. And unless I'm mistaken, I think the North Texas Water District has rights to a certain amount of water from Toledo Bend. Got to pay to transport it. Excuse me, it's not cheap, but there's a strategy. The water in Oklahoma, there's about 10 million acre feet a year that goes down the Red River and is lost. There are political and legal constraints and things like that. It'll be a great source of water in the future, but there are folks in the state of Texas willing to pay for it too. What else do you want to talk about?
I wish we'd all been known as much genius here on this redistricting stuff, because we were told by attorneys in Alabama earlier that we had to redistrict. It's gonna cost us $18,000 to redo the hospital district redistricting. And if we'd all known that, we don't have $18,000 in the hospital district to spend on it.
Gene will do it for a cheeseburger.
Maybe too late now, we've already signed the contract. But that's ridiculous for us to spend that kind of money.
If you have somebody who could do it, the reason Gene went down and did it because he'd done it in 2001 and knew how to do it, and things like that. It's a pretty complex question. But my guess is that the populations are very, very similar in the hospital district, and the map would look very much like theirs. It's something to think about. You're not going to have any Voting Rights Act problems with it and things like that, but you've got to have somebody who is confident in going to do it, has done it before, and has the time to do it. But the same option, in terms of our role, we do everything we can to help you all along. And basically, we contacted Legislative Council and said, help Gene Sheets do that. And I guess they got you started, but mostly it's Gene sitting in front of a computer screen and moving those lines so that basically those districts have the roughly equivalent numbers of people, that the districts are fairly compact, that they're all contiguous. And then if you have voting rights deal, they're not going to let you go segregate a minority population to try to limit participation. And when you have districts that have minority representation, they're not going to let you erode it. And those rules are fairly simple. I don't think I think you have to try, you'd have had to try pretty hard to violate those things, wouldn't you? And it would have been pretty obvious that you were. But you're right, and if there's any way that we can help in the future or currently, just let us know. And the lawyer's gonna be real mad because I'm down here selling the service for nothing. Just please come to the office and let us help. But like I say, there's a reason that only one superintendent did it. I don't bet you not a single hospital district in the state of Texas has sent their CEO or somebody from their accounting department to Austin to do it. But
But we're already getting hurt bad enough for cutbacks from Medicaid.
Sure.
And that's just, icing on
Absolutely it is. Imagine what that $20,000, yeah, imagine what that $20,000 means in a school district. That's a bunch. What else y'all want to talk about? Oh, there's gotta be some more stuff besides your football team, which is really good. Was there anything else we ought to talk about? Where's Cindy?
She stepped out for a minute.
She's only heard this speech about 21 times, and so she can be excused.
What part of the Texas budget goes towards welfare, the various types?
I'm not sure, because a lot of that's
But
through the Department of Health Services and through the Texas Workforce Commission. I think most of the money that goes to the Workforce Commission is in programs to help, but in terms of pure welfare payments, you remember several years ago, and this was before I was in the legislature, we did the Welfare to Work program, which provides clear incentive for people. They can't stay on welfare forever. You have to prove that you're seeking work, and that if you're offered something that's viable, you take it. And so I don't know what that percentage is.
Well, that was my next question is, I mean, I'm a true believer in Adam Smith's, his philosophy about
Yeah.
wealth is coming from labor, and whenever you have people that aren't working, then it's gonna be a detriment to society. And that was what my next question was, what was the state, what were we doing as a state to get people back to work and contributing to
Because the state will not
Taxes.
support them if they're not working, which is one of the biggest distinctions. There are people who cannot work, we know that, and for a variety of reasons, and that's fine. And I like to think that we're compassionate enough that we think the government ought to make some sort of provision. At the same time, that if people are capable of working and there are jobs, they need to work. And so we don't provide much incentive not to work, both when it comes to things like workers' comp and in welfare. And I think that's the way that it should be.
I know we're a long way off, but when we barely finished this biennium's budget, they saying the next biennium is about the same shortfall projection. Is that still kind of on target?
I think the shortfall projection is going to be less this time because the economy is better. We've had 17 straight months of increased sales tax revenues, still not up to 2008 levels. And so we've still got a shortfall there. I think it's going to continue to improve, and I think oil and gas revenues are going to continue to stay strong. I'd be surprised, unless this recession goes a lot deeper, to see oil and gas prices much less. I'd say surprised. I was surprised in 1982 when they went to $12. So yeah, I'll be surprised, but I don't see anything driving them down, certainly not in terms of supply, and certainly not when the EPA decides that the sagebrush dune lizard needs to be protected at the cost of 1 million barrels a day in the Permian Basin. Now that's sure not going to bring energy prices down. All that talk about independence from foreign oil, that's a myth, but particularly in light of things like that. So it's going to be a challenge. We're going to have to get into the Economic Stabilization Fund. I have no problem with that. I think leaving some in there is going to be key toward doing our budget in the next biennium. But yeah, it's going to be a tough budget. We were talking at lunch, and I think probably what we ought to do is, since we have lowered the base on school districts, I think this next time we ought to do, which is kind of a good version of the old zero-based budgeting. Since we know public schools are 40% of our budget, we know what our enrollment growth is. I think we need to go in and do that first. 40% enrollment growth inflation, and then segregate that money. And don't say, well, we'll borrow a little bit from public ed for Medicaid, and we'll borrow a little bit from transportation. Instead of compromising on all the jobs that we do, we need to prioritize the jobs that we're going to do. And that means, once again, that when we get down to things like historic preservation and Commission on the Arts, even Parks and Wildlife, that's where we need to, if we're going to make the sacrifices, let's make them in those areas. Parks and Wildlife is a good example because when the director came to see me, he said, we know we gotta take our 10% cut, and we're taking it. What you could do to help us is, we funded specific areas, give us some flexibility in those areas where we can move funds around if we need to. Quite frankly, schools can use that too, because in certain programs, if a school district uses the money there, they can't move funds around. One of the things that was interesting a few years ago, I was talking to one superintendent and said, we could, I forget what program, but there were some excess funds. And they would have liked to have moved that into an extended school day. So kids could stay in school and take advantage of, they could provide educational stuff and things like that. Be really good for the kids, just couldn't move the money there, even though the money was available. I think that we ought to see that kind of flexibility. I won't decide what that is, superintendents will tell me, and we'll put it in a bill, provide that flexibility. Yeah, it's gonna be tough, but I've said that emphatically here before, that we at the state of Texas always ought to have it tough. We ought to be worried where our money is coming from, because the people of the state of Texas do. And if we have plenty of money in Austin, I guarantee you people of the state of Texas don't. And that's no way to budget and say, we're gonna meet all of our needs in Travis County, and people of the state of Texas will just pay for it. Our obligation is to provide those things that are essential and let people in the state of Texas keep their money. They worked for it. What else y'all want to talk about?
I've written you 3 times asking for this information about retirement benefits for retired legislators, and never have gotten.
I haven't seen it. Did it go to Austin?
No, he wrote to me and I've tried to call him back.
Okay.
I have an answering machine, I've never had any response to it.
I'm sorry.
When these teachers are only getting $2,000 or $3,000 a month retirement, and people like Delwyn Jones are on $9,000 or $10,000 based on that formula, I don't think that's right.
Because I'm not eligible,
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. It is difficult to and this too was done long before I got there. It's difficult to design a pension program for state employees that make $600 a month. And so while legislative pensions are not the same as judges, ours only changes when the judges change and stuff.
That's real convenient.
Well, you gotta tie it to some, and we have nothing to tie it to, because we can't do it as a percentage of salary and things like that. It's $600 a month, and so I don't know who set it up. Delwyn Jones is based upon, I don't know, 30-something years of service, and I don't know how they came up with that. I will never know, because I won't get that. One of the questions on retired teachers has been going from a defined benefit program to defined contribution. And what those of us in the private sector essentially call a 401k. I like it and prefer it. What retired teachers are telling me is they don't want to do it. I think that benefit should accrue to the benefit of teachers, and if they don't think it's the benefit, I don't think we ought to change it. I don't think we ought to change it in midstream. And what people will tell you, I'm not so sure that whole thing is not coming from people in the investment business who are going to look at a whole lot more business for essentially stock brokerage firms trading monies. And clearly, in a good economy, maybe that'll be great for teachers. But if we were to get an economy, if it's about $1,700 a month for a teacher, if we run the risk of getting into a bad economy and those investments start doing well and that benefit going to $1,200 a month, I'd be absolutely against that. And so I think that what you're going to see happen is nothing, particularly for existing retired teachers and probably those currently employed in school districts. At some point, if it is done and say off in the future, it will convert for new hires, that's a different deal altogether. Because let's say a person is 20 years old, he or she's in school, and as long as they know what they're getting into in terms of salary and benefits, that's fine. Changing that benefit after 30 years of active teaching and being retired, I don't think is right. And I don't think you're really going to see much behind it. It's coming from the Greater Houston Partnership, and I don't know what the deal is behind it. And I'm just not in favor of it. When retired teachers tell me they're in favor of it, then I think it's worth looking at, but at this point, they're not saying that. What else you want to talk about? G's pension is not going to reflect his redistricting activities. Sorry.
You mentioned EPA a little bit ago. This is going to a different subject with them. New regulations that are coming out on power plants. Is there anything legislatively that's y'all have looked at? Anything?
It's not in the state of Texas.
Okay.
Legally, there is because we filed suit. And they're cross-state pollution standards. They had to go far and wide to find any pollution out of power plants that had come from the state of Texas. And they might have found some stuff to essentially shut down coal-fired plants, I think is ridiculous. The state of Texas has got some real problems with EPA. This is true when it comes to flex permits, certainly true when it comes to the sagebrush dune lizard and things like that. Just recently, and those plants had till December to fix the problem or close down. The administration has backed off from that some now, and we've got some time. We're going to see, hopefully down just south of Odessa, a new clean carbon plant. It should start operating about 2014. Its emissions profile will look about like that of a natural gas plant, which is very good. And that's going to be a complete game changer when it comes to coal-fired power plants. But making those plants close down now, we had rolling blackouts around the Metroplex this summer. There'll be absolutely full-fledged blackouts if they make them close 11 plants. They cannot and should not do that. Quite frankly, if they already had the transmission in place to take wind energy from here down to the Metroplex, I don't think they'd had rolling blackouts during the summer.
What's gonna be our situation with the state representative? We don't have one now. I understand he's retired or going.
He's going to retire, Warren Chisholm. He is running for the Railroad Commission. You've got 4 people running in this district, the district that's changed completely. It's now 19 counties. It was big anyway. No, it's more than 19 counties. It's 22, 21, 22. Did you redistrict that too? I know I didn't. Anyway, there are 4 people running. Jim Landrew is a sitting member of the legislature, but only one county in that district is the same, but it's a big one. It's Hale County. Then Gary Walker from Yoakum County is running, and Gary served 6-8 years in the legislature. And Gary's quite an authority on water issues, and has been, I mean, I talk with Gary all the time to talk about water, because he lives in an agricultural community that's got some real water challenges, and he just understands it. Max Smith is an attorney from Pampa, and the advantage he has is Pampa is one of the 2 counties that really have population. Pampa is, I don't know, 17,000, 18,000, something like that. And then Ken King is in the oil field service business and the president of the school board in Canadian. And those are the Republicans. And I think it's safe to say that a Republican is going to be elected in that district. But those are the choices right now. And the filing doesn't even start till November. And we'll see what happens there. But that's what's going to happen in that district. Happens sometimes when we see a retirement, we see a brand new election. In this case, we're not used to it because Warren Chisholm was there for 25 years, 24 years.
So we'll stretch, like this district will stretch all the way to Canadian?
Uh-huh. Kind of slanted because obviously Plains is here and it's going to go up, catch Hale County, and up and have Canadian and Pampa in it.
Almost
Yeah.
400 miles, I think.
How much?
It's just almost as long as the 31st district, which is actually a little longer because it goes from Hemphill County all the way to Mentone is, Winkler County. Mentone is the county, the least populous county in the country. It's got 84 people. So if you're doing redistricting like me, you have to come up with 811,000 people. It's tough to do 84 people at a time. But it makes Bailey County one of the big counties in the district. You can imagine what that's like when there are people who have districts in the city of Houston. Take about an hour to get across it in traffic. It's kind of interesting. What else y'all want to talk about? Nothing? I don't know what are people here talking about. always public schools, always immigration, that happens all the time. You're in the Lubbock district for TxDOT, and I think that you're seeing them pretty responsive. They've quit telling your county judge, every time somebody wants something done in the county, they've quit telling your county judge, call your members of the legislature because we don't have enough money. Because then we tell them, we'll go fire some people in Travis County and put them to work in the districts, and we'll take care of those problems. And we can. It is a sizable bureaucracy, and the point of that bureaucracy is not just to employ a bunch of people in Travis County, it's to provide roads and highways in the state of Texas. And I think the new management is going to address that, and I'm looking forward to them doing it. I think they're good. You know, an awful lot of what goes Texas government has been tied up in politics. You got a governor who's running for president, you got a lieutenant governor who's running for the US Senate. And we see a lot of that stuff. A lot of that has played into the session.
I got to call her about getting to mow the right of way out here a couple of weeks ago. The man that runs this department out here says they've been cut down to 2 mowings this year. And next year they're gonna be cutting down to 1. And let me tell you, that right of way looks pretty bad when they only mow it twice or once or twice a year.
It seems like the last couple of years, it has been a couple of times. It's done with private contractors.
Right.
And
But we were lucky it didn't rain, or it'd been a lot worse.
have a hard time thinking in terms of being lucky that it didn't rain.
Well, it didn't rain, and those meetings had grown up, we'd lost some highway patrolmen.
Yeah, and when clearly, when we have a situation where it grows up so much that it affects sidelines and things like that, they're gonna have to do something.
This guy here says they were a lot better off back when they had their own tractor and shredder and contracting it out.
They haven't asked for a new tractor shredder. And when they do, and they tell us what they can do, and we're, clearly, if you're using a contractor and you go more than twice a year, there's a certain level, if you retain a contractor, it's gonna be cheaper to have their trailer and mower. That's fine. All they need to do though is bring us that information and help us with the numbers. We can deal with the numbers. They've not done so yet that I see. What else you want to talk about? Okay.
Just real quick, the new speed limit laws that went into effect last month, I think,
Uh-huh.
nighttime. I've noticed several trips to Lubbock, Amarillo, Clovis. Signs haven't come down. What, I mean,
You can
Does
imagine
that
how many
matter?
thousands of signs
Well,
are
yeah,
around
I
the state of
understand
Texas. The speed limit does not go into effect until the signs are changed.
okay.
Yeah. But they will, and I don't know specifically what they're going to be. The original proposal was 85 miles an hour. And quite frankly, I just think that was too fast. I think that's way too fast. The Institute at Texas A&M thinks that's pretty fast. When you look at the increase in the number of accidents you're gonna have, we talk about survivability of accidents at 85 miles an hour, it's not very pretty. The fact that they would even think of letting my wife and mother-in-law go 85 miles an hour is just incredible to me. And so we're gonna see 75, which I think was reasonable, particularly for our part of the state, where the distances are going. I think that whole thing is gonna work out, but it's just a question of having the time to do all the signs, and that'll get done.
But as long as that sign's up,
Yeah, as long, you gotta
I
drive
mean, I'll
posted.
give my money to the state of Texas, but I don't want to give it criminals. Because I'm going 5 miles faster at night.
Yeah,
You know,
just,
so.
until it's changed, the posted speed is the legal speed. You can try to talk a patrolman out of it, but it's gonna be a challenge. And most of the people who are doing it are doing more than 5 miles over.
True.
the line.
Can we send a copy of this to your mother-in-law?
I have survived on the fact that she lives in Houston. Which is funny. And if there is, for somebody like me, if there is a certain laugh, it's mother-in-law jokes. Because everybody's had one.
Everybody
And
understands?
quite frankly, my mother-in-law loves them. I never understood that. I'll tell some mother-in-law joke and She just said it's the funniest thing.
She knows she's gonna move in with you. Then I'll come back to you.
To her, as long as I'm thinking about her, she doesn't care what the context is, I guess. I have a great mother-in-law. But part of that greatness is the 600 miles between every location. And I tell her that. I haven't said anything I wouldn't tell my mother-in-law. That wouldn't be right. And I certainly can't get away with it with her daughter, so.
You were saying that if the people on the median mowing again,
Hmm?
that if they would come to you with this information, y'all would work with it, do they realize that after all?
Of
these
course they
years?
do. They ask us for money all the time.
No, I don't mean the money, but the flexibility to go back and perhaps change the way they're doing it.
It's about the money.
It's-
That's what TxDOT comes to us for. And so if TxDOT came to us and said, instead of hiring contractors for this, if we have the equipment, the mower and the trucks, we can do it cheaper, but they haven't come to us with that yet. I think that's a really compelling argument. The state of Texas has not told them to mow twice a year, or even once a year.
Well, then why are
They are
doing it that way?
allocated a certain amount of money, and they determine what those priorities are. And if they can find a cheaper way to do it, I think it's great.
Well, maybe they need some directive from somebody, because it really makes the state look bad when the roads look so shoddy.
That discussion goes on all the time. Yeah, they know what it takes to make it look good, but we don't go in and tell them every little detail. They come and say, this is what we need for maintenance and for, what we need for maintenance and construction and project management and things like that, and then we budget the money. What we do very often is we'll get questions about right-of-way and things like that, then we'll call the district engineer and say, the county judge in Bailey County would like you to come and look at median or bar ditches and do something about it. But they're free to do what it takes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in turn then, if you start getting a lot of complaints, or the Senate starts getting a lot of complaints about our highways you can't see, are you going to go to those people and say, hey, look, we've allocated X amount of dollars, why aren't you doing your job?
Yeah, we call them all the time about stuff. We get calls, it tends to be from county judges because that's who oversees
Well, that's who we would
the
probably
largest
talk to.
network in the farm to market roads and things like that. And we'll call a district engineer and say, you've got a county judge, and it may be Bailey County, it may be Hemphill County or something like that, said they need this, this, and this. Will you take a look at it? And they generally will, and they're pretty responsive, quite frankly. We've got to head for Dimmitt, I guess.
Yeah.
As always, thank you very much. I appreciate you being at this town hall meeting. I appreciate your support for this community and this school system and the input that we get. It's important to get that input. It's a big, big step. And it's important to know what people think and what they need in a community. And y'all don't have to stay up to 1 o'clock in the morning to email me on the floor of the Senate like Gene does. But it's still important information. And I appreciate having it. I appreciate the privilege and honor of representing this county in the Senate. There are 181 people that get out of 25 million that have the opportunity to serve in the legislature. And that makes it a pretty rare thing, and nobody should ever take it for granted because we're there to serve the needs of the people of the state of Texas. And I appreciate that responsibility. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not grateful for. And I appreciate it. And whenever there's something going on in the community and you want me here, be more than happy to come. I do a lot of communication with county judges, with city officials, and certainly with superintendents, and it really helps me a lot. But I appreciate the privilege, and thanks an awful lot for giving up part of your day today. Thanks so much for coming, Mr. Wiles. It's nice.